In the last episode, we talked about the Whig Party and their strength in Florida. And in fact, there were still a number of Whigs or descendants of Whigs, people who were not Jeffersonians, who were in Florida government, and um, voters as the 1860 election approached. And in 1860, you had the Republican Party, which was effectively an anti-slavery party, or did not want to see slavery extended, but there were definitely abolitionists in that party, nominate Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was not on the ballot in Florida. He got no votes. He was not on the ballot. But there was a two-way contest in Florida between, well, there were three names on the ballot, but Stephen Douglas, the quote Northern Democrat, only got about 2% of the vote, right? So the split between John C. Breckinridge, who was the vice president under James Buchanan and had been nominated by the Southern Democrats. I don't want to get into the history of the Democratic Convention in 1860, but there was a split between Northern and Southern wings as slavery became the only issue. And Breckinridge got 62% of the vote, and he won Florida. He was a pro-slavery candidate. He was effectively a pro-secession candidate in many ways. But John Bell, the constitutional unionist candidate, who wanted to maybe make concessions to Southern slaveholders, and in fact would end up being someone who supported the South in the Civil War, he got a pretty good percentage in Florida, higher than some of the other states, getting 36% of the vote, so higher than some of the other Deep South states. So there is still a core of Whig or Unionist voters in Florida, 36% or so, maybe with Southern sympathies, certainly pro-slavery, but not wanting to dissolve the Union. However, Lincoln wins, and the governor of Florida, Madison Stark Perry, a Democrat, a Jeffersonian, doesn't wait. He doesn't wait for South Carolina to secede in December. We always learned that Florida went third. But actually, the secession convention in Florida was called by Governor Perry before South Carolina seceded, almost a full month before South Carolina seceded. So the legislature called for an election of delegates to a secession convention. Yulee and Mallory, the two gentlemen that have just been on the screen, they were the leaders, and they were both in favor of secession. They were Florida's two U.S. senators. This is Governor Perry. And what ended up happening is there was a procession of speeches and fervor towards secession, and the Ordinance of Secession passed that convention 62-7 on January the 10th. 62-7. But popular vote would have been something like 55-45 or 60-40. So the planters and the pro-slavery elements and the Jeffersonian elements were disproportionately represented in both the legislature and in this secession convention. One person who was against secession was Richard Keith Call, who, of course, we talked about being a Whig governor, and he had a very fiery speech about the impact of secession. But Florida went forward. They seceded. They became an independent state for a matter of a few weeks, and then part of the newly formed Confederate States of America. And both Yulee and Mallory would serve in the Confederate cabinet. They would have very important roles in Jefferson Davis's cabinet. And so what ends up happening coming out of secession is Florida is completely Jeffersonian. Florida is there is no unionism. There is no counter movement of Union loyalists within Florida. Maybe there were a few here and there, a few pockets, but even Key West, which was occupied by the Union for the duration of the war, strategic in General Winfield Scott's war planning for a Union victory, was keeping Key West, but the vast majority of citizens of Key West displayed Confederate flags. They supported the Confederacy. We've done a podcast on this, actually, with Dr. Angela Zombeck, who's an expert on the subject. Florida, as I said, had a couple of members of the Confederate cabinet, Stephen Mallory and David Levy Yulee, who you saw earlier. And Mallory was a very influential member of the cabinet and was the Secretary of the Navy. Now, this is the Governor John Milton that you see on your screen, who was a fervent secessionist and was the man who brought Florida through the Civil War. And he was the governor that provided a lot to the Confederacy in terms of war food. Really wanted to carve out a role for Florida within the Confederacy, and was very, very influential in that sense. But Governor Milton left Tallahassee for his plantation in Mariana as it became very apparent that the Confederacy was going to lose, and he committed suicide. And within a few weeks, the Confederacy was no more.